Since the release of its first season, it didn't take long for The Last Kingdom to become one of the biggest historical dramas in the history of BBC Two. But it's the headlines behind the show that may actually surprise fans more than its solid adaptation from the Saxon Stories. So if you ever wondered whether Bernard Cornwell is related to one of his fictional characters, stay tuned, as we're about to explore all this and more. First of all, let's start by taking a look at Uhtred of Bebbanburg. For those who don't know, The Last Kingdom is loosely based on a series of books written by Bernard Cornwell, under the franchise name The Saxon Stories. And while these books are nothing more than works of fiction, it doesn't take much of a glance to see that Cornwell certainly drew from history when creating his fantastic story. In fact, fans of The Last Kingdom have come to call the franchise a historical drama, and they aren't wrong considering just how much of the franchise can find its origin in things that actually happened back in the day. So what about Uhtred of Bebbanburg then? He's the leading protagonist of the franchise and has quickly become a favorite amongst the fans of The Last Kingdom. But his journey has been somewhat unbelievable, all things considered, which has caused many to ask whether Uhtred actually existed when the wars described actually took place, and as it turns out, the complicated answer to this question may actually shock you. According to reports, the character is indeed based on a historical figure who went by the name of Uhtred the Bold. And as luck would have it, this legendary figure is none other than the ancestor of the author Bernard Cornwell. So if you ever wondered why Uhtred was chosen to lead the show, well, now you know. But as we mentioned earlier, the answer is a lot more complicated, as Uhtred is a drastic reimagining of the man behind the name. So how was Uhtred of Bebbanburg different from Uhtred the Bold? Fans of The Last Kingdom will know that the story revolves around the Anglo-Saxon War, which saw English forces facing off against Dane invaders for control over the various kingdoms of England. Still leading the pack is none other than Uhtred of Bebbanburg, portrayed by the brilliant and savvy Alexander Dreymon. But what really set Uhtred apart from all the other characters was the fact that he, as a Saxon, had actually been raised by the Vikings, who invaded England in the first place. This results in him gaining a deeper understanding of the situation at hand, which he uses to his advantage when going ahead to claim back his ancestral home of Bebbanburg. And this is pretty similar to what we've heard about the real-life Uhtred the Bold. According to Cornwell, he first discovered he was related to Uhtred when he reconnected with his biological father, who told him tales of his ancestors. He then stumbled upon a family tree dating back to the 6th century, and that's where he laid his eyes on Uhtred the Bold for the first time. The man who ruled over Bamburgh Castle between 1006 and 1016. But honestly, not much is known about this solitary figure. His signature is on the charter collected by Cornwell's extended family, but that's about it. As such, we very much doubt he was raised by Vikings, or that he accomplished those impressive feats attached to Uhtred of Bebbanburg. In fact, they weren't even alive at the same time. But Bernard Cornwell never called his Saxon Stories a work of fact. It's nice to hear that he was able to draw from his family's historical experiences to bring one of the best characters of the show to life, despite him only having access to his ancestor's name. When asked about what he took into consideration when creating Uhtred of Bebbanburg, he actually mentioned that his writing was less about the truth of his characters and more about the feeling he had when he first discovered how lucky his family was to have made it through the Dane invasion. As Cornwell stated in an interview a few weeks back, he felt like the formation of England, we know now, would make for a pretty entertaining story. And to him, it was the invasion of the Viking army way back when that really got him thinking about the story he wanted to tell. So when he saw the name of Uhtred the Bold, he knew that he would be using the character to let everyone know just how tough life was back then, and just how lucky everyone is to have made it through such a tough time in history. In other words, the Saxon Stories have always been about the formation of England, even though it was written from the perspective of an ancestor Cornwell only knew the name of. As to why he decided to make Uhtred of Bebbanburg a Saxon raised by Vikings, Cornwell simply said that he needed a hook that would encapsulate all perspectives at once. Cornwell also said that the choice to call the Danes Vikings was a difficult one. You see, the invading Scandinavian forces at the time were never actually referred to as Vikings. It's a common misconception that is still included in the majority of history books today, but funnily enough, the term Viking was only popularized after the many realistic events and battles that took place in The Last Kingdom. So whenever you hear a character refer to the invading army as a group of Vikings, you'll know that this was a bit of a mistake by the showrunners of the show, who have always said that they'll keep things as realistic as possible. According According to Bernard Cornwell, though, this was a question he had been posing for quite some time. He didn't necessarily want to refer to the invading force by any name other than Dane. But since it has become somewhat acceptable to group the force into the category of Vikings, he knew that the reception of the Saxon Stories would be a lot higher if marketed as such. And we're thinking that the showrunners felt exactly the same when they decided to bring the first season to our television screens. At the end of the day, you have to give the public what they want. And although references to the invading forces as Viking isn't something that would have actually happened back then, it's something that makes the audience feel a lot more invested, especially after coming off massive addictions to similar shows like Vikings and Norsemen. That being said, it sounds like The Last Kingdom is finally on its last leg. For those of you who don't know, Season 5 of The Last Kingdom was released on Netflix at the beginning of last month. And while this took a few fans by surprise, allowing them to finally binge each and every episode of the installment, the good news ends there. You see, it's now been confirmed that The Last Kingdom will not be renewed for a 6th season, despite being picked up by Netflix. Fans always knew that the 5th season of the franchise was going to be the last, but many of us had hopes that the streaming platform could save the show, as it has to so many franchises. Just look at what Netflix did for both Cobra Kai and Lucifer, for example. But it sounds like this isn't the case. That being said, fans shouldn't be too disappointed, as we still have the Seven Kings Must Die film to look forward to. This standalone movie was announced a few months back and will apparently span a runtime of around 2 hours in an attempt to bring an end to the beloved franchise. Nigel Merchant also recently spoke about the film, which he will be executively producing, and according to him, it will be based on the last 3 books of the Saxon Stories. But getting all of this content out in just 2 hours is going to be one heck of a journey. In fact, we have some concerns, but at least this will be better than nothing. But when can we expect to see Seven Kings Must Die? As of right now, there's no information as to when this anticipated film will be ready for fan consumption. But we do know that the cast and crew have just wrapped things up for the final time. Dreymon himself made the announcement a few days ago on the show's official Twitter account. And it goes without saying, but fans were beyond surprised. The film had only started filming towards the end of January, after all, resulting in a quick turnaround time of about 2 months at most. That being said, the studio is going to have to do a lot more before the film is ready for audiences across the globe. The Last Kingdom relies on quite a bit of visual effects to make things look fantastic, so we're expecting a pretty long post-production period. That being said, an early 2023 release date wouldn't be too impossible to achieve. And there you have it, everything you need to know about the state of The Last Kingdom at the moment. What are your thoughts on Cornwell's relation to the real Uhtred though? And are you looking forward to Seven Kings Must Die? Be sure to let us know in the comment section down below.